The conference hall stretched for half a kilometer, its ceiling lost in artificial clouds that drifted lazily overhead. Representatives from 300 species sat in their designated atmospheric zones, breathing their preferred mixtures, while holographic translators floated beside each delegation. The humans occupied Section 47, a modest cluster of seats near the back where the newer species were placed. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the speaker's platform, her image projected across every screen in the massive chamber. She had given variations of this speech 17 times over the past decade. Each time the response was the same. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice steady despite knowing what would come. "Earth must once again voice its concerns regarding the current expansion policies of the Zeltharian Empire. More importantly, we must address the potential consequences of ignoring humanity's repeated warnings." A ripple of what the translation software labeled as amusement passed through several delegations. The Zeltharians, massive reptilian beings who stood nearly 3 meters tall, didn't bother hiding their disdain. Their chief diplomat, Zel Krone, made a gesture that roughly translated to dismissive boredom. Sarah continued, "For 50 years, humanity has abided by the galactic warfare conventions. We have restricted our military technology. We have fought according to your rules. We have kept our word." She paused, letting the weight of her next words sink in. "But we need the Council to understand something crucial. We are not weak. We are holding back. There is a significant difference." The Vryn delegate, a crystalline being whose thoughts appeared as colored light patterns, pulsed what could only be called laughter. "The young species speaks of hidden strength. How delightfully primitive. What next, Ambassador Chen? Will you claim your gods will smite us?" Other species joined the laughter. Sarah had expected this. She always did. "I'm speaking of practical military capability," Sarah said firmly. "Before we joined the galactic community, humanity fought wars using methods and weapons that would violate every convention you hold dear. Kinetic weapons that strike without warning, weapons that poison worlds, artificial intelligence that coordinates fleets with perfect precision. We agreed to lock these capabilities away because you asked us to, because we wanted to be part of something better, but they still exist." Zelkron rose to his full height, his scales shifting to an aggressive crimson pattern. "The human makes threats in this sacred chamber. Perhaps this proves they are not ready for civilized company." "It's not a threat," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It's a warning. There's a difference. The Zeltharian Empire has claimed 6 systems in the past year, all through what you call civilized warfare. But you're pushing toward human space now. You're testing us. I'm here to tell you, officially and clearly, that you don't want to find out what happens when we stop playing by your rules." The Council's arbiter, an ancient being called a Thinax who had mediated galactic disputes for 2,000 years, raised one of its many appendages. "Ambassador Chen, the Council has noted humanity's concerns. However, the warfare conventions exist for good reason. 3 millennia ago, our galaxy nearly destroyed itself with unrestricted conflict. Entire species were rendered extinct. Planets were left uninhabitable for generations. The conventions saved us from ourselves. And we respect that history," Sarah said. "But you need to understand ours. When you found us, we had just emerged from conflicts that killed hundreds of millions. We had weapons that could glass continents. We had strategies that involved total warfare, where civilian and military targets blurred together. We learned to control these impulses, but we didn't forget how to wage that kind of war." "Empty boasting," Zelkron declared. "If humans possessed such capability, they would have demonstrated it. Instead, they lose battles following our conventions. Last month, human defenders at the Kepler 442 station fought according to proper protocols. They evacuated civilians, they issued formal challenges, they used approved weapons, and they lost. This is the human strength the ambassador speaks of. Defeat?" Several delegates made sounds of agreement. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. The battle at Kepler 442 had been a disaster, but only because humanity had followed the rules. Rules that required giving opponents advance notice, that prohibited certain weapons, that turned warfare into something closer to a sporting event than actual combat. "We lost because we fought with one hand tied behind our backs," Sarah said quietly. "We're trying to warn you what happens when we use both hands." The Thinax arbiter tilted its massive head. "The Council appreciates Earth's passion. However, without evidence of these claims, they remain merely claims. The Zeltharian Empire has followed all proper protocols in its expansion. If humanity wishes to dispute territorial claims, it may do so through the approved channels of civilized warfare. Sarah looked across the assembled species. She saw condescension in their alien features. They saw humans as children playing at being warriors, a young species trying to seem important by making grand claims about hidden arsenals and brutal tactics. Then let it be on record, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the chamber. Earth has warned the galactic community repeatedly and clearly. We are holding back. We are restraining ourselves. We are trying to be the people you want us to be. But if pushed far enough, if given no choice, we will revert to what we were, and you will not like what you see. The session ended with the usual formalities. As Sarah gathered her documents, the Vryn delegate drifted over, its crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. Ambassador Chen, it communicated through thought-to-speech translation. Your warnings would be more effective if accompanied by evidence. The galaxy has seen humanity fight. You are competent but unremarkable. Making claims about hidden capabilities only makes you seem desperate and insecure. Sarah wanted to explain that humanity's restraint wasn't weakness, that the weapons locked away in deep storage weren't mythical, that every human military academy still taught the old ways even if they couldn't practice them. But she knew it wouldn't matter. They had to learn the hard way. I hope you never see the evidence, she said simply. I truly do. 3 weeks later, the Zeltharian fleet arrived at New Perth, a human colony world home to 2 million people. The colony was primarily agricultural, with a small defensive station and a modest patrol fleet. According to galactic law, the Zeltharians issued their formal declaration of intent exactly 48 hours before hostilities would commence. Admiral James Okonkwo received the declaration aboard the defense station with a sinking feeling in his gut. He had 48 hours to evacuate civilians and prepare his forces. 48 hours that could have been used to deploy the weapons locked in the station's deepest vault. The weapons with biometric locks requiring authorization from 5 different human governments. The weapons they weren't supposed to use. Begin civilian evacuation, he ordered. Military personnel to battle stations. Load all approved weapons and prepare defensive formations according to convention protocols. His tactical officer, Commander Lisa Park, looked at him with frustration clear in her eyes. Sir, we have 63 kinetic impactors in the vault. We could launch them right now before they're in position. Their fleet would never see them coming. We could end this before it starts. And we would be the ones who broke the conventions, James replied. Earth's orders are clear. We fight by their rules unless Earth itself is directly threatened. New Perth is a colony, not the homeworld. We hold the line with approved weapons. The next 48 hours were a chaos of evacuation shuttles lifting off in continuous streams, carrying children and families and everything they could grab in their allotted time. The Zeltharian fleet maintained its position exactly beyond weapons range, waiting for the ceremonial countdown to reach 0. When the battle came, it was almost beautiful in its formality. The Zeltharians advanced in proper formation. The human fleet met them at the designated engagement zone. Both sides used energy weapons that had been approved by the Council, firing at ranges that gave ships time to maneuver, time to issue damage reports, time to surrender if things went badly. It was nothing like the wars of Earth's past, where submarines struck without warning, and missiles screamed out of the sky and soldiers killed enemies who never saw them coming. This was warfare as sport, as ceremony, as something civilized. And humanity lost. The defense station held out for 3 hours before its shields collapsed. Admiral Okonkwo ordered his remaining ships to retreat before they could be destroyed. As he watched New Perth fall into Zeltharian hands, he thought about the kinetic impactors still locked in the vault. Never used, never needed according to galactic standards. They could have won. They could have ended the battle in minutes with weapons the galaxy had forgotten how to fight against. But they had followed the rules. The occupation of New Perth was broadcast across the galaxy as proof of Zeltharian military superiority. Their propaganda showed orderly troops taking control of human facilities, their admirals giving speeches about bringing civilization to another primitive outpost. Then came the executions. 6 human soldiers had been captured when the defense station fell. Under the warfare conventions, they should have been treated as honored opponents, given proper care and eventually returned through prisoner exchange. Instead, Zelkron himself appeared in a galaxy-wide broadcast, standing over the kneeling prisoners. Let this be a lesson, he announced. His voice translated into 300 languages simultaneously. Humanity claims hidden strength. They claim to be holding back. They claim they could devastate us if they chose. These claims are lies designed to compensate for their obvious weakness. We prove this now. The execution was quick but public. 6 shots, 6 bodies. A message sent not just to humanity but to every species watching. Sarah Chen watched the broadcast from Earth's Council Embassy. Her hands clenched into fists as the camera lingered on the fallen soldiers. Around her, her staff stood in stunned silence. "Get me a secure line to Geneva," she said quietly. "It's time." The emergency session of the Human Systems Alliance convened within hours. Representatives from every human government, every colony, every military branch gathered in the virtual conference space. The question was simple, and had been prepared for this exact scenario. Should humanity abandon the warfare conventions and respond with full military capability? The debate lasted 6 hours. Some argued for restraint, for working through proper channels, for proving humanity was better than this. Others argued that the conventions had failed to protect human lives, that the galaxy viewed their restraint as weakness, that Zelkron had crossed a line that demanded response. In the end, the vote was decisive. 87% in favor. Protocol reversion. Full measures. Authorization to use all military capabilities regardless of galactic convention. President Maria Santos addressed the galaxy from Geneva, her image broadcast on every channel humanity could access. She stood in front of the flags of Earth's nations, her face composed but her eyes cold. "People of the galactic community," she began. "For 50 years, humanity has tried to be the species you wanted us to be. We followed your rules. We restricted our weapons. We fought your civilized wars. We did this despite our own history, despite our own capabilities, because we believed in the promise of something better." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a species that had finally run out of patience. Today, the Zeltharian Empire executed 6 human prisoners of war in violation of the very conventions they claim to uphold. They did this while mocking humanity's warnings, while calling our restraint weakness, while treating our attempts at peace as cowardice. Maria leaned forward slightly, speaking directly into the camera as if addressing each being individually. "You were warned. We told you we were holding back. We told you there was a difference between weakness and restraint. We begged you to understand what we were capable of if pushed too far." Her expression didn't change, but somehow her presence seemed to fill the screen, to radiate an ancient and terrible promise. You ignored those warnings. You laughed at them. You thought we were bluffing, that we were children trying to seem dangerous. Now you're going to learn the truth. Now you're going to discover why the old humans, the ones you first encountered, frightened even themselves. Now you're going to understand what we've been holding back. She straightened, her hands clasped behind her back in a military posture that suddenly made her seem less like a politician and more like a general. "This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact. As of this moment, humanity is no longer bound by the warfare conventions. As of this moment, we will fight the way we know how to fight, the way that nearly destroyed our own world, the way that made us the monsters we learned to cage." The broadcast ended with a simple message displayed in 300 languages. "You were warned. Now you'll pay." The galaxy watched President Santos's broadcast with reactions ranging from confusion to outrage to, in a few cases, genuine concern. The Galactic Council immediately convened an emergency session, demanding Earth explain its intentions and reaffirm its commitment to civilized warfare. Ambassador Chen did not attend. Instead, she sent a recorded message that played on loop whenever anyone requested Earth's presence. "Humanity is currently occupied with military operations. We will address the Council when our business is concluded." For 3 days, nothing happened. The Zeltharian Empire continued its occupation of New Perth, installing governors and beginning the process of integrating the colony into their territory. Their propaganda broadcast continued, now mocking President Santos's speech as empty rhetoric from a defeated species. "The humans threaten us with their hidden weapons," Zelkron announced in one such broadcast. "Yet we see nothing. We hear nothing. They prove our point with their silence. They are weak, they are defeated, and they will learn to accept their place in the galactic order." The broadcast was still playing across Zeltharian channels when their military command station in the Corvin system simply ceased to exist. One moment, the massive station housed 50,000 military personnel and served as the primary coordination hub for the Zeltharian fleet. The next moment, it was a rapidly expanding cloud of debris. No warning, no declaration, no energy signature that might have given defending ships a chance to intercept. The projectile had been launched from a human stealth ship positioned 2 light hours away. It was a simple cylinder of tungsten carbide alloy, 3 meters long and 1 meter wide, accelerated to 90% of light speed using a magnetic rail system that left no energy signature detectable at range. By the time the impact registered on any Zeltharian sensors, the station had already been destroyed for over an hour due to the delay in light speed communications. Within the next 6 hours, 17 more Zeltharian military installations simply vanished. Shipyards, command stations, weapons platforms, each one struck by projectiles moving too fast to see, too fast to intercept, launched from positions so distant that no counterattack was possible. The Zeltharian High Command scrambled to respond, but they didn't know where to aim their weapons. The human ships were using stealth technology far beyond anything the conventions allowed, and they were striking from distances that made conventional warfare impossible. Admiral Kwame Nkrumah commanded the human operation from the bridge of the stealth carrier Invisible Hand, positioned in deep space beyond any planetary system. His fleet of 60 ships represented less than 5% of humanity's total military strength, but they had been specifically designed for this kind of warfare, the kind the galaxy had tried to forget. Target Package Alpha is eliminated, his tactical officer reported. Kinetic impactors are away for Package Bravo. Impact in 4 hours, 13 minutes. Kwame nodded, studying the holographic display that showed Zeltharian space. Each red dot represented a military target. Each green flash showed a successful strike. The map was turning green rapidly. Maintain current positioning. Begin cyber warfare operations against their communications network. I want their fleet commanders unable to coordinate. Sir, we're receiving a wideband message from the Galactic Council. They're demanding we cease hostilities immediately. Noted, Kwame replied. Continue operations. The cyber attack was something else entirely. Human artificial intelligence, restricted under the conventions because it was considered too dangerous, now infiltrated Zeltharian systems with frightening efficiency. The AI didn't just shut down communications, it rewrote security protocols, locked commanders out of their own systems, and fed false information that sent fleets chasing phantom targets. Within 24 hours of the first strike, the Zeltharian military was effectively blind and mute. Their fleet outnumbered the human force 10 to 1, but they couldn't communicate with each other, couldn't coordinate their movements, and couldn't identify where the attacks were coming from. The galaxy watched in growing horror as a mid-tier power was systematically dismantled by a species they had dismissed as weak. News organizations broadcast footage of the destroyed installations, interviewed military experts who couldn't explain how humans were achieving such devastating results, and showed the frantic emergency sessions of the Galactic Council. This is barbarism, declared the Vryn delegate, its crystalline form pulsing angry red patterns. They strike without warning, without honor, without giving their opponents any chance to respond. This is exactly why we have the conventions. The Thynax Arbiter attempted to maintain order as dozens of species began speaking at once. Some demanded immediate action against humanity. Others quietly reviewed their own military capabilities and wondered if they had made a terrible mistake in dismissing human warnings. The ancient species called the Archons, who had been members of the Council since its founding but rarely spoke, finally broke their silence. Their representative, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, appeared in the council chamber for the first time in a century. We remember humanity's ancestors, the Archon said, its voice resonating with harmonics that bypassed translation systems entirely. We were the ones who first encountered them, who saw what they were capable of, who convinced them to accept the conventions. The younger species have forgotten why we were so insistent. The younger species do not remember the weapons we saw, the tactics we witnessed, the absolute terror of a species that had learned to wage total war. The chamber fell silent. The Archons were legendary for their knowledge and their age. If they spoke, even the proudest species listened. When we found humanity, the Archon continued, they had just detonated atomic weapons on their own world. Not in space, not against invaders, but against each other. They had submarines that struck without warning from beneath their oceans. They had aircraft that dropped incendiary weapons that created firestorms hot enough to melt steel. They had missiles that could cross continents in minutes. And they were already developing worse. The holographic display in the center of the chamber activated, showing footage that the Archons had kept sealed for 5 decades. Images of Earth's wars, nuclear explosions turning cities to ash in seconds, soldiers fighting in trenches filled with poison gas, bombers reducing urban centers to rubble, submarines torpedoing ships loaded with civilians, strategic bombing campaigns designed to break enemy morale by targeting population centers. This is what humanity was when we found them, the Archon said. This is what they agreed to lock away in exchange for the stars. We taught them civilized warfare. We gave them restrictions designed to prevent the horrors they had inflicted on themselves. And they accepted because they wanted to be better than what they had been. The footage continued, showing the massive artillery bombardments of World War I, the atomic bombings that ended World War II, the napalm strikes of later conflicts, weapons and tactics that violated every principle the galactic community held sacred. You mocked them, the Archon said, and now its voice carried an edge of anger that made several delegates recoil. You called them weak. You laughed at their warnings. You executed their people on public broadcast to humiliate them, and now you are surprised that they have returned to what they were? Zelkron, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. The Archons suggest we should simply accept this barbarism? That we should allow humans to wage unrestricted warfare while the rest of us follow civilized rules? No, the Archon replied. We suggest you understand what you have unleashed. The conventions were not created to limit humanity. They were created to protect the galaxy from species like humanity, and you have just taught them that following the conventions leads to defeat and humiliation. The emergency session dissolved into chaos as species began arguing about appropriate responses. Some demanded the Council assemble a coalition fleet to force humanity back into compliance. Others suggested negotiating an immediate ceasefire before things escalated further. Back in Zeltharian space, the situation was growing desperate. Admiral Zelthon, commander of the Zeltharian Third Fleet, had managed to gather 23 warships in the Karvax system despite the communications blackout. It was the largest concentration of functional Zeltharian military power still active. We make our stand here, he announced to his assembled captains. The humans cannot destroy what they cannot find. We will wait in stealth, detect their approach, and overwhelm them with numbers. They may have tricks, but we have the advantage of mass. It was a sound strategy based on conventional warfare thinking. It failed to account for what humans had learned during their own submarine warfare campaigns. The human fleet didn't approach the Karvax system. Instead, they deployed a weapon that had been banned by the conventions precisely because it was considered too indiscriminate and cruel. Autonomous hunter-killer drones, each one smaller than a fighter craft, each one guided by AI programmed with one simple task: find enemy ships and destroy them. The drones didn't need to see the Zeltharian fleet. They didn't need to detect energy signatures or heat emissions. They were programmed to recognize the gravitational distortions created by ships attempting stealth protocols, the tiny ripples in space-time that no known technology could completely eliminate. 2,000 drones entered the Karvax system from multiple vectors. They moved silently through space, their own drives designed to produce minimal disturbance, their sensors constantly scanning for the telltale signs of hidden ships. When they found the Zeltharian fleet, they attacked without hesitation and without mercy. Each drone carried a shaped nuclear charge designed to penetrate shields at point-blank range. They flew directly into their targets, their AI calculating the optimal impact points in the microseconds before detonation. Admiral Zelthon's flagship was the first to die, its bridge crew never even realizing they had been found before the warhead breached their shields and detonated inside the ship's primary reactor. The resulting explosion destroyed 2 nearby vessels and damaged 3 others. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, the Zeltharian Third Fleet had ceased to exist. 23 ships destroyed by weapons that gave no warning and accepted no surrender. The galaxy received footage of the aftermath because the human drones broadcast it. Debris fields where proud warships had been. Escape pods drifting in space. Their occupants alive only because the drones were programmed to ignore non-combatants once a ship was disabled. It was that last detail that disturbed many species more than anything else. The humans weren't mindlessly destructive. They were precise. They knew exactly what they were doing. Every attack was calculated. Every weapon was deployed with specific intent. This wasn't rage or revenge. This was professional military action prosecuted with terrifying efficiency. President Santos appeared in another broadcast, this one showing her standing in what looked like a military command center. Behind her, holographic displays showed real-time tactical information from ongoing operations. "Some of you are calling our actions barbaric," she said, her voice calm and measured. "You're comparing us to historical tyrants and monsters from your own worlds. You're demanding we stop and return to civilized warfare." She gestured to one of the displays behind her, which showed footage of the executed human prisoners at New Perth. "That was barbarism," she said, "executing prisoners in violation of the conventions you claim to uphold. Mocking a species that had followed your rules faithfully for 50 years, broadcasting it across the galaxy as entertainment." The display changed, now showing precision strikes against military targets, showing escape pods being carefully avoided by hunter-killer drones, showing automated warnings being broadcast to civilian populations near combat zones. "This is war," Santos continued. "Real war. The kind our ancestors fought before we learned to pretend violence could be civilized. We're not targeting civilians. We're not destroying planets. We're not committing genocide. We're destroying military capability with maximum efficiency. If that disturbs you, perhaps you should have considered it before laughing at our warnings." She leaned forward and her expression hardened. The Zeltharian Empire demanded respect through force. They wanted to prove human weakness. They wanted to show the galaxy that our warnings were empty threats. Very well. We're showing the galaxy exactly what we meant. We're demonstrating precisely what we've been holding back. The display behind her changed again, this time showing a countdown timer. 72 hours ago, the Zeltharian military was the fourth largest force in the galaxy. In another 72 hours, it will effectively cease to exist as a coordinated fighting force. After that, we will discuss terms. Until then, we suggest other species consider very carefully whether they want to join the Zeltharians in learning what human warfare actually looks like. The broadcast ended, but the timer remained visible on every screen where it had played, counting down in Universal Standard Time. Across the galaxy, military commands began running calculations. The numbers were terrifying. If humans could dismantle a major military power in less than a week, what could they do to everyone else? How many more weapons did they have in reserve? What other capabilities had they hidden during 50 years of restraint? 6 species that had been quietly mobilizing their fleets in case they needed to intervene immediately stood down. 3 species that had territorial disputes with human colonies quietly withdrew their claims. And everywhere military analysts began studying the old footage the Archons had shown, trying to understand what humanity had been before the conventions, trying to prepare for what they had become again. The countdown continued. The Zeltharian homeworld of Zelthara Prime had stood unconquered for 3,000 years. Its planetary shields were rated to withstand sustained bombardment from an entire battle fleet. Its orbital defense platforms could track and destroy thousands of incoming missiles simultaneously. Its military command bunkers were buried kilometers beneath the planet's crust, protected by layers of armor and energy barriers that could theoretically survive anything short of a direct hit from a star. At exactly midnight local time, those defenses proved inadequate against weapons designed by a species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of destroying hardened targets. The first impact came without warning. A kinetic impactor moving at relativistic speed struck the primary shield generator on Zelthara Prime's largest moon. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface, a brief flash that lit up the night sky before fading. Before the backup generators could fully activate, 17 more impactors struck in precise sequence, each one targeting a specific component of the defensive network. Admiral Kwame watched the strikes from his command ship, now positioned just outside Zeltharian sensor range. The tactical display showed each target lighting up green as it was eliminated. His weapons officer had calculated the firing solution 3 days ago, timing each shot to arrive in perfect sequence despite being launched from different positions across multiple light hours of distance. "Primary defense grid is down," his tactical officer reported. "Secondary grid activating but operating at 43% efficiency. Tertiary systems are attempting to compensate. Proceed to Phase 2, Kwame ordered. Phase 2 involved technology that most galactic species had developed, but then abandoned as too dangerous to use. Humanity had continued its development in secret, understanding that sometimes the most terrifying weapons were the ones that destroyed silently. Nanite clouds, each one containing trillions of microscopic machines programmed with one task: infiltrate and disable. They were deployed from orbit in canisters that looked like harmless debris, scattering across Zelthara Prime's upper atmosphere, where they began their invisible work. The nanites didn't explode. They didn't burn. They simply found every electronic system they encountered and methodically dismantled it at the molecular level. Defense computers, communication arrays, weapons targeting systems, power grid regulators, everything connected to a network became vulnerable, and the Zeltharian networks were extensive. Within 6 hours, Zelthara Prime's military command lost contact with 70% of its defensive installations. Automated systems shut down as their processors dissolved. Manual overrides failed as their control circuits ceased to exist. The planet's vaunted defenses collapsed not with dramatic explosions but with silent, systematic failure. "We're receiving surrender offers from the Zeltharian Military Command," the communications officer reported. "They're requesting immediate ceasefire and negotiations." Kwame studied the tactical display. 3 of the planet's 5 military command bunkers had been located and marked. The nanite clouds were still spreading through the planetary infrastructure. Zeltharian orbital forces were scattered and unable to coordinate. "Denied," he said simply. "Remind them that they had 72 hours to consider surrender." That time has expired. Now we proceed to Phase 3. Phase 3 was the part that made even some human commanders uncomfortable. It involved something humanity had learned during their own darkest conflicts: the difference between destroying an enemy's ability to fight and destroying their will to fight. The human fleet moved into orbit around Zelthara Prime in a formation the Zeltharians recognized from their own military history. It was a siege formation, designed to isolate a planet completely. Every ship capable of leaving the surface would be intercepted. Every communication beyond the planet would be blocked. The message was clear: Zelthara Prime was cut off from the rest of their empire. But humanity didn't bombard the cities below. They didn't target civilian infrastructure. Instead, they did something far more psychologically devastating. They broadcast a message on every available channel, in every Zeltharian language and dialect, accompanied by footage that couldn't be disputed. The message showed a human standing in what was clearly a military command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing real-time tracking of every remaining Zeltharian military asset. The human was Dr. Sarah Kim, a civilian scientist who specialized in military psychology. "People of Zelthara Prime," she began, speaking calmly as if discussing academic matters. "Your military command knows exactly what is about to happen, but they haven't told you. So I will." The holographic displays behind her zoomed in on specific locations: military bases, weapons caches, fleet assembly points, each one highlighted in red with precise coordinates. "We know where every single military asset on your planet is located," Dr. Kim continued. "We know where your commanders are hiding. We know which bunkers house your strategic planning centers. We know because we've spent the last 50 years mapping every species in the galaxy with sensor technology you didn't know existed." She gestured, and the display showed a countdown timer. "In approximately 4 hours, we will demonstrate our capability to destroy any or all of these targets from orbit. We will do this by targeting the uninhabited moon in your system. You will watch as we split it in half using weapons your military assured you didn't exist. After you witness this demonstration, your leaders will have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. If they refuse, we will systematically destroy every military installation on your planet." Dr. Kim's expression remained neutral, almost clinical. "We will not target civilian areas. We will not destroy your cities. We will not harm your people beyond the military personnel in those installations, but we will leave your species completely defenseless, unable to protect yourselves, dependent on galactic charity for security. Your military might, your proud warrior culture, your 3,000-year history of conquest will end not with glorious battle, but with your leaders choosing whether to save their own pride or save their people." The broadcast ended, but the countdown remained visible in the sky above every Zeltharian city, projected by human drones that darted through the atmosphere too quickly to be intercepted. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Zeltharian civilians who had been raised on stories of military invincibility watched the countdown and realized their defenders couldn't stop it. Military personnel in those marked locations understood they had been targeted with surgical precision and couldn't evacuate without abandoning their posts. Political leaders faced the reality that they could either maintain their pride or protect their species. But not both. The Galactic Council convened yet another emergency session, this one attended by nearly every member species. The chamber was filled with urgent debate, angry accusations, and genuine fear. "They're about to destroy a moon," the Vryn delegate protested, its crystalline form pulsing with distressed orange patterns. "They're demonstrating planetary-scale destructive capability. This is precisely the kind of escalation the conventions were designed to prevent." "They warned you," the Archon representative replied, its energy form flickering with what might have been frustration, repeatedly, explicitly for years. "They told you they possessed such weapons. They told you they were holding back. You laughed at them." "We must assemble the Grand Fleet," insisted the delegate from the Corvian Federation. "If we allow one species to wage unrestricted warfare while the rest of us follow conventions, it creates an impossible situation. Either we all abandon the conventions or we enforce them on everyone." The Thinax Arbiter raised multiple appendages for silence. "The Council faces a decision that will define galactic relations for generations. Do we intervene militarily against humanity, risking war with a species that has demonstrated capabilities we cannot match? Or do we attempt negotiation, potentially rewarding their abandonment of civilized norms?" Before the Council could vote, new information arrived that changed the entire discussion. Intelligence reports from multiple species confirmed what human ships had been doing during their assault on Zeltharian space. They hadn't just attacked military targets. They had completely disrupted the Zeltharian slave trade. The Zeltharian Empire, despite its public claims of civilized behavior, had maintained a massive system of forced labor drawn from conquered species. Millions of beings worked in conditions that violated multiple galactic laws, hidden from inspectors and denied by official channels. The humans had found every single one of these facilities, had disabled their defenses with the same nanite technology used against the military, and had broadcast open invitations for any ships to come collect the freed prisoners. It was a masterstroke of information warfare. Suddenly, species that had been considering defending the Zeltharians found themselves confronting evidence of widespread atrocities. The humans had known about these facilities and had waited to reveal them at the exact moment when they would have maximum political impact. Ambassador Chen appeared before the Council for the first time since humanity had begun its military operations. She looked tired but determined as she addressed the assembled species. "You want to know why we're doing this?" she said without preamble. "You want to understand why we abandoned the conventions we had followed for 50 years. Let me make it absolutely clear." Holographic displays activated throughout the chamber, showing footage from the liberated slave facilities. Beings who had been worked to exhaustion, living in conditions that would have been condemned on any civilized world, all of it happening under the authority of a species that claimed to represent proper galactic values. "The conventions protected this," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "The civilized warfare that you all prize so highly made it possible for the Zeltharians to maintain this system for centuries. Because as long as everyone followed the rules, as long as warfare was formal and limited, species like them could hide atrocities behind bureaucratic complexity and diplomatic immunity." She gestured to another display, this one showing the execution of human prisoners at New Perth. "They murdered our people on galactic broadcast, while operating slave camps that rivaled the worst crimes of human history. And you want us to continue following conventions that clearly don't work? That protect the predators and punish the restraint?" The chamber erupted in arguments, but Sarah's voice cut through the noise. "Humanity tried your way for 50 years. We followed every rule. We restricted our weapons. We fought civilized wars. And what did it get us? Our colonies threatened. Our warnings dismissed, our people executed, and our restraint mistaken for weakness." She paused, letting her next words carry the weight they deserved. "The galaxy needs to understand something fundamental about humanity. We don't make war because we hate what's in front of us. We make war because we love what's behind us. Our people, our values, our right to exist without being mocked or exploited or murdered for entertainment." The countdown timer over Zelthara Prime reached 0. Every screen in the council chamber, Every display across thousands of worlds showed the same image. A small Zeltharian moon, officially designated as uninhabited and used primarily for military training exercises. The human fleet had positioned itself in clear view, making no attempt to hide what was about to happen. 3 human ships fired simultaneously. Not kinetic weapons this time, but something far more spectacular. Focused antimatter beams that struck the moon's surface at calculated points, each one designed to penetrate deep into the lunar structure before detonating. The explosion was visible across the entire Zeltharian system. The moon didn't just shatter. It split cleanly in half, the 2 massive pieces drifting apart in a display of destructive capability that left no doubt about human power. The energy released was equivalent to thousands of conventional weapons, and it had been delivered with surgical precision. The message was unmistakable. If we can split a moon, we can destroy anything on your planet we choose. On Zelthara Prime, panic swept through military command centers. Civilian populations watched the separated moon pieces hanging in their sky, a permanent reminder that their defenses had failed. Political leaders faced the reality that continuing resistance meant watching their military installations vaporized one by one while the rest of the galaxy watched their humiliation. The Zeltharian High Council requested immediate communication with Human Military Command. Admiral Kwame accepted the call, his image appearing on screens across Zelthara Prime. "You wish to negotiate," he said simply. The High Council's speaker, an elderly Zeltharian who had spent 60 years in military service, looked defeated as he spoke. "We seek terms of surrender. We acknowledge that continued resistance is futile. We request that you honor your statement about not targeting civilian populations." "Your surrender is accepted," Kwame replied. "Your military forces will stand down immediately. Every ship, every weapon, every installation will cease operations. You will submit complete documentation of all military assets, all weapons programs, and all facilities involved in forced labor operations." He paused, and his expression hardened. "Your leaders who ordered the execution of human prisoners will be turned over for trial, according to human military law. Your species will be placed under military occupation until a legitimate government can be established, and every being you enslaved will be freed and compensated from Zeltharian resources." The terms were harsh but not cruel. Humanity wasn't interested in genocide or eternal punishment. They wanted justice, security, and a clear message to the rest of the galaxy. As the Zeltharian High Council formally surrendered, signing documents that would be studied by historians for centuries, the Galactic Council faced its own crisis. 73 species had now submitted proposals to intervene militarily against humanity. They argued that allowing one species to operate outside the conventions would destroy the entire framework of galactic civilization. The vote was scheduled for 3 days later, giving everyone time to prepare their positions. In the meantime, human forces began securing Zeltharian space, implementing occupation procedures that were efficient and, surprisingly to many observers, remarkably humane. But the countdown that truly mattered wasn't the one over Zelthara Prime. It was the one appearing now on every human military vessel, visible to anyone with sensors capable of detecting encrypted transmissions. A countdown to the arrival of the Grand Fleet, assembled by the Galactic Council to force humanity back into compliance. 74 species, 50,000 ships, the largest military force assembled in 3 centuries, and humanity's response, broadcast on open channels for everyone to hear, was 4 simple words: "We warned you." Still, the Grand Fleet assembled at the Kepler Nexus, a neutral system chosen specifically because its network of stable jump points allowed rapid deployment to multiple regions of space. 50,000 ships from 74 species represented the combined military might of most of the galactic community. It was meant to be an overwhelming show of force, a demonstration that even humanity couldn't stand against the United Galaxy. Admiral Vex Corian of the Thynex commanded the fleet. From the massive dreadnought Eternal Unity, he had spent 200 years studying military strategy and had fought in 6 major conflicts under the conventions. He was considered one of the finest military minds in the galaxy. He was also deeply worried. "Final count, Commander," he ordered, studying the holographic display that showed his assembled forces. 53,217 vessels, Admiral," his second officer replied. "All species have reported ready status. Coalition command structure is established with redundant communication protocols. We have numerical superiority of approximately 40 to 1 over estimated human forces in the region. The numbers should have been comforting. They weren't. Vex Corian had spent the past week reviewing everything known about human military operations. He had watched the footage of Zeltharian installations being destroyed by invisible weapons. He had studied the tactical efficiency of the assault on Zelthara Prime. He had read the Archon's historical files about humanity's pre-contact warfare. Transmit the final warning to human forces, he ordered. 24 hours to withdraw from Zeltharian space and return to compliance with galactic conventions. Failure to comply will result in military action. The message was transmitted across all available channels. The galaxy held its breath, watching to see if humanity would back down in the face of overwhelming force or if the situation would escalate to full-scale war. The human response came within minutes. President Santos appeared in a broadcast that reached every ship in the Grand Fleet, every world in the galactic community, and was immediately rebroadcast by news organizations across thousands of systems. She stood in what looked like a military command center, but behind her was something unexpected. A museum display. Ancient weapons from Earth's history. A sword, a musket, a machine gun, a nuclear warhead, each one representing an evolution in humanity's capacity for violence. Members of the Grand Fleet, Santos began, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of sadness. You've given us 24 hours to surrender, to return to following conventions that failed to protect us, to accept that our restraint should continue even after it proved disastrous. She walked along the display, stopping at each weapon. Every one of these weapons was once the pinnacle of human military technology. Every one was considered devastating in its time, and every one was eventually surpassed by something worse. We learned to kill with rocks, then spears, then arrows, then bullets, then explosives, then atomic fire. Each time we thought we had reached the peak of destructive capability. Each time we were wrong. Santos turned to face the camera directly. For 50 years we've used only the weapons you approved. Energy weapons that give warning. Ships that fight in formations you understand. Tactics that follow rules you established. We did this not because we couldn't do more, but because we chose not to. Behind her, the displays changed, showing technical schematics that made military analysts across the galaxy suddenly very attentive. Weapons that violated every convention. Technologies that most species had never even conceived. You're assembling 50,000 ships to force us back into compliance, Santos continued. You believe numerical superiority will overcome whatever advantages we demonstrated against the Zeltharians. You're calculating that even with superior weapons, we can't defeat such overwhelming numbers. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried genuine regret. You're making the same mistake the Zeltharians made. You're assuming you understand the scope of what we've been holding back. You're not listening to our warnings even now, even after we've shown you what happens when you push us. The technical displays behind her now showed something that made several species. Military commands immediately begin emergency communications with their fleets, a weapon system called a von Neumann replicator, designed to reproduce itself exponentially using raw materials harvested from asteroids. We have weapons that build more weapons, Santos said quietly. We have AI that coordinates fleets with zero lag across light years. We have biological weapons that target specific genetic markers. We have quantum entanglement communication that can't be jammed or intercepted. We have missiles that exist in superposition until they strike their targets. We have technologies that we've kept locked away because they represent the kind of warfare that nearly destroyed our own world. She walked closer to the camera, her expression intense. And we're telling you, one final time, that you don't want to see these weapons used. Not because we'll feel guilty about using them. We stopped feeling guilty about doing what's necessary centuries ago. But because once we deploy these capabilities, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. The galaxy will have to live with knowing that humanity doesn't just have conventional military superiority. We have the capacity to make warfare so devastating that your conventions will seem quaint. Santos gestured to the museum display behind her. Every one of these weapons was considered too horrible to use, until someone used them. Until necessity demanded that we abandon our restraint and do what we had to do to survive. The galaxy is forcing us back to that state. You're demanding that we prove ourselves not just militarily capable, but overwhelmingly superior. So there's no question, no ambiguity, No possibility that anyone else will make the same mistake the Zeltharians made. She straightened, her hands clasped behind her back in a formal military posture. So here are our terms. The Grand Fleet will disperse within 24 hours. The Galactic Council will recognize humanity's right to maintain whatever military capabilities we deem necessary for our security. The conventions will be revised to include enforcement mechanisms for species that violate them. Because rules that only the peaceful follow aren't rules at all. Her expression hardened. If these terms are rejected, if the Grand Fleet advances, we will demonstrate exactly what we mean. We will fight a war that makes our actions against the Zeltharians look restrained, and we will win. Not because we want to, not because we enjoy it, but because we warned you, repeatedly and clearly, and you refused to listen. The broadcast ended with footage that the Archons had kept sealed for decades, video from humanity's first contact with galactic civilization, showing young human soldiers demonstrating their weapons to Archon observers. The footage showed nuclear detonations, kinetic bombardments, chemical weapons, biological agents. The Archon observers' reactions were visible, their energy forms flickering with what their species expressed as horror. And at the end of the footage, a young human general speaking to the Archon delegation. We know these weapons are terrible. We know we're monsters for having created them. That's why we're willing to lock them away, to follow your conventions, to try being something better. But you need to understand that we're choosing this. If that choice is ever taken from us, if we're ever pushed into a corner where following your rules means destruction, we'll revert to what we were, and you really, really don't want that. The footage ended, but its impact rippled through the galaxy. Species that had voted to assemble the Grand Fleet now faced the reality of what they were demanding. They weren't just asking humanity to surrender. They were forcing humanity to demonstrate capabilities that might fundamentally alter galactic warfare forever. Admiral Vex Corian watched the broadcast 3 times, each viewing making his concern grow. He had spent 2 centuries studying warfare, but it had all been civilized warfare, formal declarations, approved weapons, understood tactics. What the humans were threatening was something entirely different. Analysis, he requested from his tactical staff. The reports came back within hours. Every species in the Grand Fleet had independent analysts review humanity's claims. The consensus was disturbing. Based on the technical schematics shown, on the demonstrated capabilities against the Zeltharians, and on the historical footage from first contact, humanity was likely being truthful about their capabilities. More concerning, several species confirmed they had theoretical research into some of the technologies Santos had mentioned. Technologies they had abandoned as too dangerous or too unethical. The humans hadn't just theorized. They had built, tested, and stockpiled. Communication from the Archon delegation. Vex Corian's communications officer reported. They're requesting private channel to the fleet command. The Archon representative appeared in holographic form, its energy matrix pulsing with urgent patterns. Admiral Vex Corian, it began, bypassing usual diplomatic formalities. The Archon Collective wishes to share classified information with the Grand Fleet Command. Information we have kept sealed since first contact with humanity. Proceed, Vex Corian replied, though he suspected he wouldn't like what he was about to hear. The Archon shared sensor logs from their first encounter with human military capabilities. The data was clinical, precise, and absolutely terrifying. It showed human weapons that operated on principles the galactic community considered theoretical impossibilities. Fusion bombs, antimatter warheads, kinetic weapons that could strike from beyond sensor range, biological agents that could be tailored to specific genetic profiles. This is what humanity was with primitive technology, the Archon explained. Chemical rockets and atomic fission. They have had 50 years with access to antimatter production, quantum computing, and advanced material science. Their claims about what they've developed are almost certainly understated, not exaggerated. Vex Corian felt something he hadn't experienced in 200 years of military service. Genuine fear. Why did you allow them into the galactic community if they were this dangerous? Because they were more dangerous left alone, the Archon replied simply. Better to integrate them, to teach them our ways, to give them a reason to maintain restraint. It worked for 5 decades. But you, Admiral, and the species you represent have undone that work. You have given them reason to abandon restraint. The Archon's form pulsed with something that might have been anger or sorrow. We warned the Council repeatedly that humanity's restraint was voluntary. We explained that the conventions worked for them only because they chose to follow them. And now you have assembled the largest military force in 3 centuries to tell them the choice was wrong. That following the conventions leads to defeat and humiliation. Vexcorian studied the data, running calculations in his head. The Grand Fleet had numerical superiority, but if the humans deployed even a fraction of the capabilities they were claiming, the battle would be far from certain. And even if the Grand Fleet won, the cost would be catastrophic. Recommendation? He asked the Archon. Withdraw immediately. Accept humanity's terms. Revise the conventions to include real enforcement mechanisms. Because, Admiral, the alternative is a war that will teach the galaxy why the conventions existed in the first place. And that lesson will be written in the casualties of thousands of ships. Vexcorian ended the communication and sat in his command chair, staring at the tactical display. 50,000 ships. 74 species, the united force of most of the galactic community, against one species that had spent 5 decades preparing for exactly this scenario. The countdown timer showed 23 hours remaining. He began composing his report to the Galactic Council, a report that would recommend immediate withdrawal and acceptance of human terms, a report that would likely end his career, but might save millions of lives. But before he could transmit it, his sensors officer shouted an alert. Admiral, detecting massive quantum fluctuations across the entire fleet. Unknown signatures. They're appearing inside our formation. On the tactical display, thousands of new contacts suddenly materialized. Not ships. Something smaller but far more numerous. Human drones. Each one carrying a simple payload and a simple message. The message broadcast across all frequencies, appearing on every screen in every ship in the Grand Fleet. This is a demonstration. Each of these drones carries a Mark I fusion warhead. They appeared inside your defensive perimeter using quantum teleportation technology. They are currently unarmed and will remain so, but they could have been armed. They could have detonated. Every single ship in this fleet could have been destroyed in the last 30 seconds. The drones began moving, flying through the fleet formation in perfect coordination, weaving between ships that scrambled to track them but couldn't lock weapons fast enough. We are showing you this because we want you to understand. We don't need to defeat 50,000 ships in conventional battle. We can strike from ranges you can't defend against. We can deploy weapons you can't intercept. We can wage war in ways that make numbers meaningless. The drones accelerated, moving faster than any ship in the Grand Fleet could match, and vanished in bursts of quantum displacement, teleporting away as suddenly as they had appeared. 23 hours remain. Choose wisely. Admiral Vexcorian stared at his tactical display, watching his officers struggle to understand what had just happened. 50,000 ships, 74 species, the most powerful military force in centuries, and humanity had just proven they could kill them all without losing a single vessel. The countdown continued. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within an hour of the drone demonstration. The chamber was filled with panicked delegates, angry military commanders connected via hologram, and the heavy silence of species that had suddenly realized they were completely outmatched. Admiral Vexcorian presented his findings directly, his 200-year military career giving weight to his assessment. The Grand Fleet cannot win this engagement. He stated bluntly, humanity has demonstrated the capability to strike inside our defensive perimeter, using technology we cannot counter. They can deploy weapons without our sensors detecting the launch. They possess quantum displacement technology that makes traditional defensive formations meaningless. The Corvian delegate stood abruptly. Surely we don't surrender to threats and demonstrations. We have 50,000 ships. Even with advanced technology, they cannot destroy such numbers. They don't need to destroy us, Vexcorian replied calmly. They only need to demonstrate that they could. Every ship in the Grand Fleet is now aware that at any moment, armed drones could appear inside their hulls. Would you order your people to fight knowing that every vessel could be destroyed before they fire a single shot? The chamber erupted in arguments. Some species demanded the fleet advance regardless. Others called for immediate negotiations. A few quietly began recalling their ships, unwilling to risk their crews on what increasingly looked like a suicide mission. The Archon representative raised its energy form, commanding attention through sheer presence. The Council must understand something fundamental, it said, its voice resonating through the chamber. Humanity did not develop these capabilities in response to recent events. They have possessed them for decades. Every weapon they have shown, every technology they have demonstrated, existed long before the Zeltharian conflict. They built them, tested them, and locked them away in secure facilities across their space. The Archon gestured, and holographic displays activated showing human military installations that had existed throughout the 50 years of contact. Facilities the galactic community had known about and dismissed as conventional bases. These were not training centers, the Archon continued. They were storage facilities for weapons too dangerous to destroy, but too necessary to completely abandon. Humanity spent 5 decades maintaining a military capability they chose not to use, preparing for the possibility that someday, someone would force them to revert to what they had been. The displays changed, showing research reports that the Archons had compiled over decades, human scientific papers on theoretical weapons, human military academies teaching tactics that violated conventions, human wargames practicing scenarios that would never occur under civilized warfare. They never stopped being warriors, the Archon said quietly. They simply learned to pretend. They became actors playing the role of civilized beings while maintaining the capacity for total war. And we, the Archon Collective, knew this. We monitored it. We allowed it. Because we understood something the younger species did not. The Archon's form shifted, displaying images of threats the galactic community had forgotten. Ancient wars, extinct civilizations, dangers that had been eliminated so long ago that they had faded into myth. The galaxy needs warriors, the Archon continued, not the ceremonial warriors you have become, fighting formal battles with approved weapons. Real warriors, species capable of waging total war when necessary. We allowed humanity into the community and accepted their hidden capabilities because we knew, eventually, the galaxy would need them. A new image appeared, deep space telescope data showing something that made several delegates gasp audibly, a massive fleet of unknown design, moving through the void between galaxies. The image was dated just 3 months earlier. This is why, the Archon said simply, an extragalactic force. Unknown origin. Unknown intent. Estimated time of arrival at the galactic rim is 99.4 years. We detected them only recently as they passed through a gravitational lens that made them briefly visible. The chamber fell into stunned silence. The implications were staggering. An alien force from beyond the galaxy, large enough to be detected across such vast distances, approaching slowly but inexorably. The Archon Collective has known for 3 months, the ancient being continued. We have been preparing, analyzing, attempting to determine their nature and intent. What we know is limited but concerning. That fleet is massive, far larger than anything the galactic community could assemble, and they are coming here. The Thin-Ax Arbiter found its voice first. Why tell us now? Why reveal this during a crisis with humanity? Because this crisis is interconnected, the Archon replied. The galaxy has spent 3 millennia making warfare civilized, formal, restrained. You have forgotten how to fight total war. You have lost the capacity for unrestricted conflict. And when that fleet arrives in a century, civilized warfare will not suffice. The Archon's form pulsed with what might have been frustration or determination. Humanity remembers. Humanity maintains the capacity. Humanity can teach the galaxy what we have forgotten, but only if you stop trying to force them back into restraints that will doom us all. Another delegate, a Vryn whose crystalline form pulsed deep blue patterns of worry, spoke up. You're suggesting we need humanity to prepare us for this threat? That we should accept their demands and their weapons? I'm suggesting that the conventions which have maintained galactic peace for 3,000 years are about to become obsolete, the Archon replied. An extragalactic invasion will not follow your rules. They will not give formal declarations. They will not use approved weapons. They will wage war to win, using whatever means necessary. And if the galactic community cannot adapt, cannot remember how to fight such wars, we will lose. The chamber dissolved into chaos as species began demanding more information, questioning the Archon's data, arguing about appropriate responses. In the midst of it all, Ambassador Sarah Chen requested permission to address the council. The Arbiter granted it, and Sarah's hologram appeared beside the Archon representative. Members of the council, she began, and something in her tone made the chamber fall quiet. We knew about the approaching fleet. The Archons shared their data with humanity 2 months ago, as part of ongoing consultations about galactic security. That revelation caused another wave of shocked responses, but Sarah continued over them. Humanity has spent the past 2 months analyzing the threat, running simulations, preparing strategic assessments. Our conclusions match the Archon's. The approaching force represents an existential threat to the entire galaxy, and the current galactic military structure is completely inadequate to address it. She gestured, and new displays activated showing human military projections, tactical simulations, resource calculations, strategic assessments. A civilized war against that fleet will result in total defeat within 5 to 10 years of their arrival. The conventions that work for internal galactic conflicts will fail catastrophically against an external threat that doesn't follow those rules. The galaxy needs to relearn total war, needs to remember how to fight without restrictions, needs to prepare for conflict on a scale you haven't experienced in 3,000 years. Sarah paused, letting that sink in. Humanity can teach you. We remember. We maintain the capabilities. We have spent 5 decades studying galactic military structures while preserving our own warrior traditions. We know how to fight the kind of war that's coming. But we cannot do it while being forced to follow conventions that will get everyone killed. The Corvian delegate, still defiant, spoke up. You're using this threat as justification for your recent actions. How convenient that an extragalactic invasion appears just when you need an excuse. The Archon responded before Sarah could. The data is available for independent verification. Any species with sufficient sensor capability can confirm the fleet's existence. And the timeline is why we chose not to reveal this information sooner. 99 years is multiple generations for most species. The risk of panic, of social destabilization, of species abandoning cooperation in favor of desperate preparation, all seemed worse than delaying the announcement. But humanity forced our hand, the Archon continued. Their response to the Zeltharian situation, their demonstration of capabilities, their demands for convention revision, all of it accelerated a conversation we needed to have eventually. So yes, we are revealing this threat now in this context because it is relevant, because the galaxy needs to understand why humanity's warnings were not just about self-defense, but about galactic survival. Sarah stepped forward in the holographic space. Our terms remain the same. The Grand Fleet disperses. Humanity maintains unrestricted military capability. The conventions are revised to include real enforcement mechanisms, but we add one more condition. She looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of as many delegates as possible. Humanity will lead a galactic military reform effort. We will teach interested species how to fight total war. We will share technologies that you abandoned as too dangerous. We will help you remember what war actually means when the opponent doesn't care about your rules. In exchange, you provide resources, cooperation, and commitment to preparing for what's coming. The proposal hung in the virtual air, revolutionary in its implications. Humanity wasn't asking to dominate the galaxy. They were offering to prepare it for an existential threat that most species hadn't known existed until minutes ago. Admiral Vex Corian, still connected from his flagship, spoke into the silence. I recommend the Council accept these terms immediately. The Grand Fleet is already experiencing morale problems. Ship crews are aware of humanity's demonstrated capabilities. Several species are unilaterally withdrawing their vessels. If we attempt to press forward with military action, the fleet will fragment before engaging the enemy. He paused, and his voice carried the weight of 2 centuries of experience. But more importantly, as a military professional, I recognize the truth in what humanity and the Archons are saying. The conventions work only when everyone follows them voluntarily. An extragalactic invasion will not. We need to relearn total war, and we need humanity's expertise to do it. The vote took 3 hours. Species caucused, consulted with their home governments, argued among themselves. Some refused to participate, stating they needed more time. Others voted immediately based on Admiral Vex Corian's recommendation. In the end, 68 species voted to accept humanity's terms. 4 voted against. 2 abstained. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. The Thinax Arbiter made the official declaration. The Galactic Council accepts the terms proposed by humanity. The Grand Fleet is hereby ordered to disperse and return to home systems. Humanity is granted unrestricted rights to maintain and develop military capabilities as they deem necessary. A committee will be formed to revise the warfare conventions with input from all interested species. The Arbiter paused, and its next words would be remembered for centuries. Furthermore, The Council recognizes humanity's offer to lead galactic military reform efforts. A new organization, the Galactic Defense Initiative, will be created with human leadership to prepare the galactic community for the approaching extragalactic threat. Member species are encouraged to participate fully and commit resources to this preparation. The session ended, and across the galaxy, the response was mixed. Some species celebrated the avoidance of war. Others worried about what humanity's new role meant for galactic politics. Many simply felt overwhelmed by the revelation of the approaching threat. In the Human Command Center on Geneva Station, President Santos watched the proceedings conclude and allowed herself a moment of exhaustion. Beside her, Admiral Kwame and Ambassador Chen stood quietly. "We just committed humanity to defending the entire galaxy," Sarah said quietly. "That's a bit more than we bargained for when we warned them about pushing us." "We warned them we were holding back," Maria replied. "Turns out what we were really holding back was our willingness to take responsibility for everyone else's survival. Now they know." 3 months later, the first Galactic Defense Initiative training facility opened on a human colony world. Military personnel from 47 species arrived to learn what humanity had to teach. Tactics that prioritized winning over formality. Weapons that violated every previous convention. Strategies that treated war as a problem to solve rather than a ceremony to perform. The instructors were human veterans, many of them older soldiers who had learned their craft before contact with the galactic community. They taught their students about unrestricted warfare, about fighting to win rather than fighting for honor, about the brutal mathematics of survival when the alternative was extinction. On Earth, in a sealed vault beneath Geneva, engineers began unsealing weapons that had been locked away for 5 decades. Kinetic impactors, antimatter warheads, self-replicating drones, quantum displacement bombs. Every tool humanity had created for total war, now being prepared for the conflict to come. Admiral Kwame stood in his new office, now titled Commander of the Galactic Defense Initiative. On his desk sat a small display showing the countdown. 99.2 years until the extragalactic fleet reached the galactic rim. Behind him, Colonel Sarah Kim entered carrying data pads filled with training schedules, resource allocations, and strategic planning documents. "The first class is showing promising progress," she reported. "The Corvians are adapting particularly well to unrestricted tactics. The Vryn are struggling with the ethical implications but acknowledging the necessity." Kwame nodded, studying the countdown. 99 years to teach species that have forgotten war how to fight one. To take a galaxy that prizes civilization and turn it into something capable of total warfare. To prepare for a threat we know almost nothing about. He turned to face Sarah and a slight smile crossed his face. "You know what the ironic part is? We spent 50 years trying to prove we could be civilized. Now we have to spend the next century proving we can teach everyone else to be brutal." Humanity went from trying to fit in to being responsible for everyone's survival. "We warned them," Sarah replied with a slight smile of her own. "We told them we were holding back. They just didn't realize we were holding back our capacity to protect them too." Through the office window, Earth hung in space, its surface dotted with lights from cities that had once launched weapons at each other, and now built weapons to defend species who had mocked them. Humanity had gone from warrior species to restrained member of galactic society to, finally, guardian of the entire community. In deep space, human monitoring stations tracked the approaching extragalactic fleet, updating calculations and feeding data to the analysts trying to understand what was coming. The fleet moved slowly but inexorably, crossing the vast emptiness between galaxies at speeds that would take a century to reach their target. In that century, humanity had to accomplish something unprecedented. Transform a galaxy that had forgotten war into a unified force capable of total warfare. Teach 300 species how to fight like humans while maintaining enough civilization to be worth defending. Admiral Kwame looked at the countdown timer one more time. 99 years, 4 months, 6 days. Plenty of time if they used it well. An impossibly short time to transform an entire galactic civilization. "Send word to all GDI facilities," he ordered. "Begin Phase 2 training protocols, advanced weapons systems and coordinated fleet tactics. If we're going to teach the galaxy how to fight a real war, we might as well do it thoroughly." He pulled up a file on his display, one that had been sealed since first contact with the galactic community. Human military doctrine from the wars of old Earth, adapted and updated for interstellar conflict. The file name was simple and direct: Total War Protocols External Threat Response. Humanity had spent 3,000 years of its history learning to fight, 5,000 more learning to build civilizations, 50 years learning to restrain themselves, and now they had 99 years to teach everyone else what they had learned. The countdown continued, marking time until an unknown enemy arrived to test whether humanity's warnings, humanity's weapons, and defend those who had doubted them would be enough. The galaxy had ignored Earth's warnings about being held back. Now they would discover that humanity had been holding back not just weapons and tactics, but something more fundamental: their capacity to become the guardians that the galactic community didn't know it needed. Somewhere in the depths of space, the extragalactic fleet continued its slow approach, unaware that the galaxy they were targeting was no longer the civilized, restrained community it had been, unaware that one species had remembered how to fight total war and was teaching everyone else, unaware that when they arrived, they wouldn't face a galaxy of ceremonial warriors playing at war, but a unified force trained by the species that had nearly destroyed itself learning to fight. 5 years after the dissolution of the Grand Fleet, the first joint military exercises were held. 17 species participated, practicing coordinated strikes using weapons that would have been illegal under the old conventions. The operation was considered a modest success, though human observers noted it would take decades before most species truly internalized the principles of unrestricted warfare. 10 years in, the first independent galactic species developed their own kinetic impactor systems based on human designs. The Corvians, who had once demanded military action against humanity, now led the development of advanced weapons platforms throughout their space. They had learned quickly that survival mattered more than pride. 25 years in, a memorial was erected on New Perth, the colony where the Zeltharian occupation had killed human prisoners and started the cascade of events that transformed the galaxy. The memorial listed the names of the 6 executed soldiers and bore a simple inscription in multiple languages. They died following rules. We live because we learned when to break them. 50 years after humanity's demonstration of force, the first generation born, knowing about the approaching threat, reached adulthood. They had grown up preparing for a war their grandparents wouldn't live to see, training in tactics that their great-grandparents had invented. The galactic civilization had fundamentally changed, becoming something harder, more pragmatic, more united by necessity than by choice. The Zeltharian Empire, dissolved and occupied for decades, was eventually reconstituted as the Zeltharian Commonwealth, a federation of their former territories that had learned humility and cooperation. Many Zeltharians served in the Galactic Defense Initiative, including the grandson of Zelkrone, the leader who had executed human prisoners and sparked the conflict that ended his empire. 75 years in, the deep space monitoring stations detected the first transmissions from the approaching fleet, not communications intended for the galaxy, but internal signals within the extragalactic force. Human cryptographers and linguists worked alongside experts from 200 species to decode them. What they learned was both terrifying and clarifying. The approaching force called themselves the Harvesters. They moved between galaxies, consuming resources, dismantling civilizations, processing entire worlds into raw materials for their endless expansion. They had done this across multiple galaxies over millions of years. They followed no conventions, recognized no surrender, showed no mercy. They were the ultimate test of everything the galaxy had been preparing for. Admiral Kwame, now in his 90s and planning his retirement, reviewed the decoded transmissions with a mixture of vindication and dread. This was exactly the kind of enemy the Archons had warned about, the kind of threat that made the old conventions irrelevant. "How long until your successor is ready?" President Santos asked. She was in her 80s now, her second term having been extended repeatedly by emergency provisions as the galaxy prepared for what was coming. "Commander Torres is more than ready," Kwame replied, referring to the woman who would take over leadership of the GDI. "She's been training for this her entire career. She grew up knowing this war was coming. She's better prepared than I ever was." Maria nodded, looking at the countdown timer that had become a fixture in every military command center in the galaxy. 23 years, 7 months, 14 days. "We've built the largest military force in galactic history," she said quietly. "We've unified 300 species under a common command structure. We've deployed weapons that would have been unthinkable under the old conventions. We've done everything we can to prepare, and it might not be enough," Kwame said bluntly. The harvesters have consumed entire galaxies. We're one of many on their list. But we have one advantage they might not expect, which is, we're ready to fight the kind of war they understand. Totalva. Unrestricted warfare. Fighting to win rather than fighting to look civilized while losing. Kwame smiled grimly. Turns out humanity's warnings about what we were holding back weren't the end of the story. They were preparation for this moment. In the final years before the harvesters' arrival, the galaxy underwent its final transformation. Every habitable world contributed resources to the war effort. Shipyards operated continuously, producing vessels designed specifically for the conflict to come. Weapons platforms surrounded every strategic system. The entire galactic community mobilized with a unity that would have been impossible under the old system of ceremonial warfare and competing pride. And at the center of it all was humanity. The species that had warned the galaxy they were holding back, that had demonstrated what restraint actually meant, that had proven themselves capable of both devastating violence and thoughtful leadership. The Archons, who had watched civilizations rise and fall for millennia, made a final observation to the Galactic Council as the countdown reached its final year. 3,000 years ago, we established the conventions to save the galaxy from itself, the ancient being said. We succeeded, but in doing so we made you soft. Made you forget what war truly costs and requires. Then we found humanity, a species that remembered, a species still close enough to their own wars to understand what they meant. The Archon's energy form pulsed with something that might have been satisfaction. We taught them to be civilized. We gave them the stars. We made them restrain themselves. And when the galaxy needed it most, when an existential threat emerged that made those restraints obsolete, they remembered what they had been. They warned you. You didn't listen. And in forcing them to prove themselves, you created exactly what the galaxy needed. Guardians who understand both civilization and warfare. Leaders who can be brutal when necessary and restrained when possible. Warriors who fight to protect rather than conquer. Humanity didn't just warn you they were holding back. They became what they needed to be when you needed them to be it. The Archon paused, and its final words carried a weight that would echo through galactic history. The harvesters are coming to harvest another galaxy. They expect prey. Instead, they will find predators who learn to pretend they weren't. Who learned to cage their violence without forgetting how to unleash it. Who warned everyone what they were capable of, were ignored, and then proved it beyond any doubt. Earth warned the galaxy. The galaxy ignored the warning. And now the harvesters will pay the price for the galaxy's education. The countdown reached 0 on a clear day across Earth's northern hemisphere. In command centers throughout the galaxy, 300 species watched their sensors as the harvester fleet finally crossed into the Milky Way galaxy at the edge of uncharted space. 5 million ships. Technologies refined across 1,000,000 years of conquest. A force that had never been defeated, that had consumed countless civilizations, that represented everything the galactic conventions had been designed to prevent. They were met by a unified galactic fleet of 7 million vessels, commanded by species who had spent a century learning to fight like humans, armed with weapons designed by the species that had nearly destroyed itself mastering war, coordinated by AI systems that made instantaneous decisions across light years of space. The harvesters sent their standard demand for surrender, the same message they had transmitted to 100 galaxies before. It was met with a response crafted by human linguists and approved by the Galactic Council. We are the Milky Way galactic community. We do not surrender. We do not negotiate. We fight total war against existential threats. You were warned by the distances you crossed that we had time to prepare. You ignored that warning. Now you will learn what it means to face a galaxy that learned from humanity. You will learn what happens when 300 species abandon civilization and embrace warfare. You will learn that sometimes the monsters you're hunting learned to cage themselves, and now you've given them permission to be free. Earth warned us. We learned. Now you'll pay. The first battle began 17 light-years from the galactic rim, in a system humanity had designated as Forward Defense Position Alpha. It would later be called the Battle of First Contact, and it would be studied by military historians for generations. The harvesters fought the way they always had, with overwhelming force and no regard for their own casualties. They expected prey behavior, expected the defenders to break and scatter when faced with superior numbers. Instead, They faced coordinated strikes from weapons they had never encountered, tactics that sacrificed territory to create kill zones, strategies that treated ships as expendable resources rather than precious assets. They faced a galaxy that had learned humanity's most important lesson. Sometimes survival requires becoming the monster you're afraid of. The battle lasted 6 months. The Harvesters lost 300,000 ships. The Galactic forces lost 500,000. But the Harvesters were stopped. Their advance halted for the first time in their million-year history. And in the aftermath, as both sides regrouped and prepared for the next engagement, a message was transmitted from the human flagship Vindication to the Harvester fleet. You are fighting a galaxy that spent 3,000 years forgetting war, then spent 100 years remembering. You are fighting species that learned from humanity, that were taught by the species that created nuclear weapons, that perfected submarine warfare, that invented strategic bombing, that developed kinetic bombardment and antimatter warheads and quantum displacement bombs. You are fighting a galaxy that was civilized, became savage when necessary, and made that savagery precise. You harvest galaxies that don't know how to fight. You've encountered one that learned from the best teachers, their own nearly suicidal mistakes and the species that survived making those mistakes. Earth warned the galaxy we were holding back. The galaxy learned what that meant. Now you're learning what it means when that lesson spreads to 300 species unified by necessity and trained by warriors who never forgot. Welcome to the Milky Way. We hope you're ready, because we are. The war would last 15 years. The Harvesters would be pushed back slowly, system by system, paying for every light year with millions of casualties. The galactic forces would lose billions of beings, see hundreds of worlds devastated, pay prices that made the old conventional wars seem gentle by comparison. But in the end, humanity's warnings proved prophetic in ways no one had imagined. They had warned they were holding back. They had warned the galaxy about pushing them. They had warned that unrestricted warfare was something the galactic community had forgotten and needed to remember. And when the existential threat arrived, when the Harvesters came expecting another easy conquest, they found instead a galaxy that had taken humanity's warnings seriously, a galaxy that had learned from the species that had mastered warfare through terrible necessity, a galaxy that had been civilized but remembered how to be savage when survival demanded it. Earth had warned them, the galaxy had learned, and the Harvesters paid the price for every species that had ever ignored humanity's warnings, every empire that had mistaken restraint for weakness, every civilization that had forgotten what war actually meant. In the end, that was humanity's true gift to the galaxy. Not weapons or tactics or technologies, but the understanding that sometimes the greatest strength is choosing not to use your power, and the greatest wisdom is remembering how, when you must.